This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast? Smart move. Being financially savvy? Smart move. Another smart move? Having State Farm help you create a competitive price when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
There's a reason Chevy trucks are known for their dependability, because they show up no matter the weather, push forward no matter the terrain, and deliver. That's why Chevrolet has earned more dependability awards for trucks than any other brand in 2025, according to J.D. Power. Because in every Chevy truck, like every Chevy driver, dependability comes standard. Visit Chevy.com to learn more. Chevrolet received the highest total number of awards among all the trucks in the J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Vehicle Dependability Study. Awards based on 2022 models. Newer models may be shown. Visit jdpower.com/awards for more details. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive.
Stuck in a dinner rut? We've all been there. Bored with the same takeout options or eaten a bowl of cereal for dinner. Let Cook Unity handle dinner tonight with ready-to-heat, chef-crafted meals delivered straight to your door. New menu drops, weekly recommendations, and a thriving community of award-winning chefs keep your meal options endlessly delicious. With a team of over 160 culinary innovators creating an ever-expanding lineup of small-batch dishes, Cook Unity serves up more than 400 irresistible meals for every craving. Plus, you can pause, skip, or cancel anytime, making it easy to find a plan that fits your tastes, schedule, and lifestyle. Shake up your meal routine. Go to cookunity.com/mealtime50 or enter code mealtime50 before checkout for 50% off your first week and 20% off your next 3 weeks. That's 50% off your first week and 20% off your next 3 weeks at cookunity.com/mealtime50.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast, and this special episode paying tribute to John Robertson, who sadly passed away on Christmas Day at the age of 72. The news of Robbo's passing was announced by Nottingham Forest, and it was a sad piece of news to receive on Christmas Day. One of the club's most legendary figures and arguably its greatest ever player passing away at the age of 72, and it gave us an opportunity to reflect on a quite incredible career. And many Forest fans of that era and beyond have got great memories of Robbo and the achievements in a Forest shirt. And we're going to reflect on some of those achievements in this episode. I'm Stephen Toplis, and I'm joined by Pete Hillier, otherwise known as Zigga Zagga on Instagram. Welcome, Pete. And just to start things off, really, what are your memories of John Robertson? And when you think of John Robertson, what comes to mind?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it hit me pretty hard, this one, when I heard about it on Christmas Day. The biggest player of my lifetime. You said arguably our greatest player, not being pedantic, but our greatest player. I don't think there's much argument about it. For the likes of me, certainly the most important, perhaps for reasons that we'll go on to, about his narrative arc and that of the club being so closely tied together, and that feeling that he was very much a Forest man in the way that other people who were great players, but perhaps weren't, and one of us, and a human being. And by all accounts, I only ever met him once. That was very briefly, and I think we were both quite drunk. But by all accounts, a very, very lovely man indeed as well. So, that's important too.
Yeah, and I think, as we'll get on to, he was part of a generation that was very much in tune between players and fans. There wasn't the separation that there is nowadays. It felt very much like the fans were on a very similar platform to the players, and both had a lot in common. And I think Robbo really embodied that as well in his time, not only as a player, but in the years that followed as well. I think that relationship between him and the Forest fans was always very special, and it continued to be right up until he passed away. John Robertson was born in 1953 and grew up in Glasgow, and in his early days growing up, he showed a talent for football. And when he left school, he joined Forest. That was in 1968. And really, it takes the best part of a decade for him to show his best form in a Forest shirt. But going back to the start of the 1970s, he was in the Forest team, wasn't he? And I think you were there as well, seeing some of his very early Forest appearances.
It was, yeah, and it wasn't great. Nothing about it was great. I was born in 64, so I kind of missed out on the great team of sort of 67 and 68, and only got to sort of see Story Moore play a couple of times, and didn't really have a hero of my own. My brother's 10 years older than me, and he will talk about those players, and my dad obviously clearly was older again, and he had his heroes, and I felt a bit cheated because we were terrible in the early 70s. We were, absolutely shocking. We went down in 72. 70-71, which was Robbo's first season. He played about 5 games in midfield and didn't do anything. He was an on his backside player, I think it's fair to say, in an on its backside club that he couldn't even get into the team 73-74 when we were in Division 2. And, like I say, you're talking about a club that's got nothing really. I think the opening game of the season that year, I don't think there were more than 10,000 there. And you look at some of the stats. We were a club being watched by 7,000 people. County were bigger than us. We weren't even the biggest club in this city at that point. And he was a nothing, unwanted player in a nothing really unloved, except by a few hardcore of us, club that felt like it was going nowhere. So to go from there to the rise that he did, it is quite a remarkable thing, really. We won't see anything like that again, and there won't be anybody who mirrors that from start to finish like he did. And as you say, you'd see the guy around. You'd see him around when he was playing. The players would be having their pizzas in Antonio's restaurant on Trent Bridge. They'd all be in there. You see him after he'd finished playing. He'd be lurking in the corner of the South Notts Hussars, sadly a pub that's no longer with us, or the Test match, or wherever, with a fag on and a drink. More latterly, I've seen him in. I can never remember his role called Rocco or David Lloyd. The gym down on Wilford Lane.
Yeah.
He used to go in there for coffees, and I don't think he did any sport. And he'd be in there with Frank Clark and Colin Barrett, and I'd occasionally go there as a guest to play tennis against a mate, and they'd be in there. And I don't know if it's urban myth or not, but a couple of years ago, Robbo was reputed to have won the gym member of the year for the person who'd been in most times. Until they clocked that what it was he was signing in and out every time he went for a fag break. And it appeared he'd been to the gym something crazy like I don't know what it was, 2,000 times in a year or something. But you're never going to see Cristiano Ronaldo down there doing that, are you?
No, that just sounds like Robbo, doesn't it? That's brilliant. But yeah, just to come back to the point you were making about, certainly in his early years at Forest, John Robertson was a player who was languishing at a club which was languishing. It took until the arrival of Brian Clough in 1975 for things to change, not only for John Robertson, but for Forest as well. And he was on the transfer list, wasn't he, when Clough arrived? And it looked as if he was going to be on his way out of Forest and well away from Nottingham at one point.
Yeah, I think he was on his sort of like coming to the end of his time there. I'm pretty sure he was on the transfer list when Clough arrived. I did have a sneaky look, saw that he scored 1 goal prior to Clough arriving, which was a cup replay at Fulham, I think, where we got a draw and went to a second replay, then lost the home one. That's the sort of thing we did then. Fulham probably still is the sort of thing we do, isn't it? But he was going nowhere. But Clough clearly saw something in him and turned him from a sort of out and out midfield player into a winger. And we had Terry Curran playing on the other side at the time, and he was another hell of a player. He's a player who we should be talking about in the same terms had he not got injured and his career went off the rails, because he was absolutely awesome as well. And I think between him on one side and Robbo on the other, we just started tearing teams apart. But I suppose there's your genius of Clough, isn't it? Seeing the magic in somebody that nobody else is seeing the magic in.
Yeah, and I think as well it was Peter Taylor, wasn't it, who had a big effect on his career. John Robertson tells the story that in a pre-season in Germany, Taylor pulled him aside and basically said, "Me and Clough think you can play, so what's your problem? Knuckle down, work hard and become the player that we think you're going to be." And yeah, talking about him playing on the left flank, well, he was originally at Forest playing mainly as a central midfielder until Clough came along and moved him over to that left-hand side. And it was that move, wasn't it, to that left-hand side of the pitch which really transformed Robbo into the player that he became. Yeah,
you got to bear in mind as well that he did a lot with his right foot. So he was a right-footed player. You look back now, he scored a lot of goals cutting inside, curling them in with his right foot. So it took something clever to figure out that was where he was best suited. I'd heard that same tale that you had heard there about sort of like that holiday and Taylor pulling them aside, and Clough. I think Clough said how unhealthy and unfit he looked, and Clough said, like, "I'm no oil painting, but I sit next to him. I look like Errol Flynn." But they obviously had an effect. They obviously had an affection for him, didn't they? There was a clear thing. There was a clear. I don't know what they saw in him or what resonated with them, but something obviously did. And did they like a bad boy? Did they liked Kenny Burns? Didn't they? In a weird sort of way. Did they just see someone to bring along a project, sort of Eliza Doolittle, sort of My Fair Lady kind of thing? Let's turn this into something magical. But I suspect the important thing to remember there is underlying all of that must have been a massive amount of talent. He was clearly a very, very talented guy. I mean, I can't remember the game. It was sometime either league winning year or European Cup first time winning year. I can't remember when it was. My dad had fell through the roof of the John Player Horizon factory. He was up in some scaffolding, and he went through and he carved his leg up really bad. This does come to John Robertson in a minute, not being about my dad, which meant him being in a wheelchair for about 3 or 4 months. And my mum worked in what was the old committee bar, so it was fairly well connected there. Forest was a club at the time. My mum worked in behind the bar in there, and they said, "Oh, put Terry, my dad, on the touchline in a wheelchair." So I went and stood with him, and we stood up on the main stand. There's not a lot of room between the touchline and stand, still isn't, is there? But there was even less then. So we were literally within touching distance of Robbo's shorts, my dad in his wheelchair with his foot up, me stood there. And you're thinking, how's he doing this? It was like wizardry. He was going places where there were no places to go. He was making places where there was nothing. He was making space and time out of nothing. And the joke had been that he couldn't run. That first yard or two was so fast. You had no idea what he was going to do. I don't think he ever ran more than 20 yards. Didn't see him doing a great deal of defending. But it was just like a guy weaving magic. And I've never seen anything like it on a football pitch. It was a privilege to see. So there was clearly a massive amount of talent there, and that must have also always been there, because he played for Drumchapel Amateurs, didn't he, in Scotland before Forest. I think Archie Gemmell had played. They've got a long list of people who've played there. They were a top amateur side. So he was, although Forest was his first pro club, he was clearly a very, very, very good footballer, because I don't think he'd have played for them otherwise when you look at their history and reputation.
Yeah, and I think he's another one who came out of Scotland in that era of great players who, when you actually look at how many caps they got for Scotland, it's not very much. 28 caps for John Robertson seems paltry compared to the talent he had, but he wasn't the only one who suffered from that. So many great Scottish footballers of that era came away with not so many international caps. And I know there weren't as many international games played back then, but there was also, it seemed, a thing where Scottish players either just weren't appreciated by the manager of the time or they just didn't fancy them. And with John Robertson as well, I think his international career only spans about 5 years. So you can see why he only ends up with the 28 caps, although it could easily have been double or maybe even triple that. But yeah, coming into his style of play, he was a player who didn't have a great deal of pace, but he didn't need the pace because over that 1 yard, as you say, he would just turn defenders inside out and he would find a pinpoint cross and he would do something of note every time the ball was played to him down that left-hand side.
Yeah, and he could finish as well. He could score as well. I mean, early on in his career, he didn't seem to be able to find a goal from anywhere. But he was a good finisher. I mean, and some of his best goals, like I say, were not Hudson-Odoi-ish cutting in from the left, because he was more of a sort of like curl them into the corner sort of type than sort of like bang them sort of like hard and low. But he seemed to score a lot of goals like that. If you scroll back through YouTube, you can find a lot of them, sort of like foggy, misty nights where he just drops his shoulder one way, typically in front of the Trent end, drops his shoulder towards the main stand, cuts inside, and then sort of like floats one into the Trent end net. Absolutely fantastic. But I think the other thing to note about him is, and I hadn't clocked this till I got asked to come on this and thought, let's just check out the stats a little bit more. I'm not a stats person, but he didn't miss any games. He played, I think, league-winning season. He played 42 league games, and I think the year after. And I think for about 5 years, he never played fewer than sort of like 39 league games. So he was a pretty robust sort of character as well. Bearing in mind the kind of hard man opposition you had trying to kick lumps out of him, you can only assume that they just couldn't get near him enough to kick him. And he probably never ran fast enough to tear anything. I don't know. I keep using the word magical, but a magician.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
His rise in football seems to coincide with Forest's rise as well. So in 1977, Brian Clough leads Forest back into the First Division after a 5-year absence. John Robertson is in the team. He stays in the team as Forest go up into the First Division and produce an incredible season where they go on to win the title and also win the League Cup. And Robertson has a key part to play in that League Cup final because it's his penalty in the replay that wins the cup for Forest. And this is one area of his game in which he was so strong. Penalties. I mean, I've seen countless penalties that he's taken for Forest. He slots them away with ease, barely misses a kick. And talking about the goals that he could produce, when Forest needed him in those moments to step up and put the ball in the net from 12 yards, more often than not, he delivered.
Yeah, I can't. Someone perhaps correct us, but I can't think of him missing one. But whether he ever did or not, but yeah, that League Cup final one was obviously massive. I mean, if the season had stopped there and we'd won a bit of silverware, that was an incredible season, without going on to win the league. The fact that it was a hotly disputed penalty against Liverpool makes it even better, doesn't it? But particularly with and I say that as somebody who's not got a problem with them, but it does make it it does make it better. He always said, didn't he, that, and I don't know whether he was being tongue in cheek, but the greatest goal he ever scored was the penalty against England that won the game for Scotland. When was it? 81.
Yeah.
He always says, like, he's on record, isn't he, as going like, oh no, my favourite ever goal was that one. But you suspect that might have been slightly tongue in cheek for the benefit of whoever was listening. But yeah, very, very, very reliable from the spot. Just seemed to sort of like slot them in with no pace, and he always seemed to do the same thing, but nobody ever seemed to be able to read it, which was a bit interesting. Just sort of like gentle tuck into the bottom corner. Nothing fancy. No fancy run-ups or real. Not as far as I can remember. No real sort of no real sort of variation in it. He just did what he did.
Yeah, and every time he would find the back of the net, and a very assured penalty taker. There's one against Ajax, I think, in the European Cup semi-final in 1980 that he slots away. I think there's one against Liverpool again in the League Cup semi-final that year as well, 1980, which takes Forest through to Wembley for the final, and it just shows you the composure and the quality that he had under pressure. But it's really from open play that he excels, whether it's creating chances for his teammates or scoring goals himself. And Brian Clough very famously said to everybody in the team, even particular big money signings like Trevor Francis, when you've got the ball, give it to John Robertson because he can play. And there are very few teams, if any, in football history where the fulcrum of the side is somebody who's out on the wing. But for Forest in that period, John Robertson was the fulcrum and everything went through him.
Yeah, and he was. You got to think about the style of football that we were playing then. It wasn't the most expansive type of football you've ever seen in your life. He was an outlet as well. We'd soak up a lot of pressure at times, and one of the reasons we weren't sort of loved by the media. But we'd hold teams off, and he would be a really, really important outlet, because the other thing he could do was he could hold the ball up well, and he wasn't going to give it away. Get the ball up to him. Something was going to happen with it, and the least you were going to get was to get bought a little bit of time. I suppose the other thing is he didn't do very often was head it or score with headers. But there's the famous one, and possibly the world's most surprising ever goal, was the diving header against Cologne. If you're going to choose somebody to go full length diving header to keep you in a European Cup semi-final, Robbo wouldn't have been the person you'd have expected to have got on the end of that. But he did that as well. He scored some important goals at important times.
And that diving header against Cologne came during a time of great tragedy for him, because he lost his brother in a car crash that week before the Cologne game. I think there were doubts whether he would play or not, but Brian Clough and Peter Taylor said to him, do what you need to do. John Robertson comes back for this semi-final and plays and scores that goal. And I think I've read a story where after scoring that diving header, he sort of looked up to the skies and said, "That's for you, brother." And that was a real testament to the guy as well, to come back from such a personal tragedy like that and play football and be his brilliant best on the pitch was a real testament to his character as well.
I'd completely forgotten about that. And now you mention it, I remember the concern going into the match. I was a kid at the time. I wasn't concerned about his mental well-being or that sort of stuff. Your world revolves around you and what you want, doesn't it? Just thinking like, Robbo might not play in this. Robbo might not play in this. I had completely forgotten that. And you're right, that the celebration is very much, I think there's a pointing upwards, isn't there? Nothing flashy, but a pointing upwards, a glancing upwards, and that, like you say, is presumably a tribute to his brother. He also had a difficult family time, didn't he? With his, and I know very little about this, but he had a daughter who was born with cerebral palsy, I believe, wasn't it? And was quadriplegic. Yeah. So it's, not the most straightforward of lives.
No, I think he lost his daughter at quite a young age. I think it was 13 in the end. So
I believe so. Yeah.
Another difficult period in his life, but yeah, that was again testament to his character, coming through these personal tragedies and still achieving so much in the game. And going back to his playing days, and he scores that goal in the semi-final against Cologne. It puts Forest 3-2 up on the night, before they're then sunk by the Japanese sub, who comes on and scores past Peter Shilton. In the second leg, Forest go through thanks to Ian Bowyer's goal, and then we get to the final against Malmo in Munich, and Robertson has a key part to play. It's his cross from the left-hand side which sets up a diving header for Trevor Francis at the back post to win the cup for Forest. And to talk about these European Cup finals, I think in terms of John Robertson, it's worth talking about them together because he plays a big part in both of Forest's wins in 1979 and 1980.
Yeah, my memory of the Munich goal. He was down the right from where we were looking. So obviously he was on the left wing, but we were seeing him on the right. He heads off into the corner and the ball sort of loops across him. I remember my first thought, I'd say, bearing in mind I'm a sort of 15-year-old kid, is like, oh, you've overhit that one. Not seeing Francis coming in, but I presume he knew he was coming in. It wasn't a fluke. It was probably the only real bit of magic in the entire game. It was a pretty flat game. And then obviously the goal in Madrid is a fantastic goal. The more you look at it, the more it is a brilliant goal. I was looking over my shoulder at it coming up on the screens down there yesterday before the City match, and you look at it, you think a lot went into that goal. There was a lot of deft movement and shoulder dropping and sort of like awareness of space and where you were putting it. I think Bomber Bogey did well to jump out of the way of it as well, which I'd never noticed before, but I bet he could have blocked it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely huge.
And another couple of notable goals that he scored for Forest included a strike in the 1978 Charity Shield against Ipswich, which was a typical Robertson goal, driving past defenders and hammering the ball home. I think it hits the post on the way through and he scores from the outside of the box. But yeah, the goal in 1980 against Hamburg in that European Cup final is the crowning achievement of his time at Forest, and just underlined how important he was to that Forest team. And I think it's been said a few times before, but it's worth repeating. That period between 1977 and 1980, I don't think there was anybody better in Europe than John Robertson.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Whether there was anywhere else in world football, but I think he was the pinnacle of European football at that time. It was said, wasn't it, before that Hamburg final, that he'd get nothing out of Manny Coutts, wasn't it, their fullback, who was a very, very good, World Cup winning fullback. And that was what prompted Clough to say, wasn't it? We've got a little magician on the left who'll turn him inside out, or whatever it was Clough said. One of those Cloughisms, wasn't it? We've got our own artist. That might be when he talked about him being the Picasso, might it? And he did. He just turned him inside out. I think he was unsurpassed. Just going back to that Charity Shield goal that he scored, I'd forgotten that one as well, because what everybody remembers about that one is Peter With scoring a hat-trick, beat Ipswich 5-0, and I think the Robbo goal in that gets a little bit overlooked. But yeah, lots of big goals. I mean, what a CV that is, isn't it? For a guy who was playing for a second division team, couldn't get in the team, unwanted. What a list of things to have on your CV there by the end of that. A lot, again, like I say, along with being recognised as just like a thoroughly decent bloke and a man of the people. Yeah, that's it's what we could all look up at that and envy that, couldn't we? As a life well lived. And I think you get the impression he lived life well.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
So while that European Cup win in 1980 represents the high point in John Robertson's career, his second European Cup, it also represents the same for Forest, becoming double European Cup winners back to back. And from 1980 onwards, even though Robertson is still in the team, Forest begin to go on a gradual decline, and this carries on until he leaves the club in 1983 to join Derby. But just tell us a little bit about that, Pete, and the kind of what happens between the European Cup win and John Robertson eventually leaving Forest a few years later.
There's a period that I always think of now as the sort of like period of perpetually finishing about 12th, but I'm not. I think that's probably not quite true. I think we finished 12th a few times, and we were okay, and we were getting placings that we'd probably snap your right hand off for now, and certainly would have done in the 25 or so years that followed that. But it all went a bit flat, and probably, I don't know, had we been spoilt? Some of the magic went. Did we start to become a bit entitled and take it for granted? And sort of like finishing third or fourth wasn't very good, and we just went a bit flat. We made some signings that probably turned out not to be great. Sort of Ian Wallace's and Peter Ward's, and we probably didn't replace players with players of similar quality until you get into the sort of like later 80s and 90s, and you start getting that like really good crop of young lads coming back through again. So there was a bit of a flat sort of period then. It was a bit of a flat time in the club. I've got lots of memories of watching us slog out 0-0 draws at home to Southampton, standing on the Bridgeford end with about 11,000 in the ground and thinking, where's everybody else gone? Even big games then, we were perhaps only pulling in 20,000-21,000 if we were playing Arsenal or Man United or somebody of those ilks. And I think football generally was a bit flat then. People were a bit hacked off with sort of Liverpool dominance, and TV was, live matches were coming. Everything felt a bit, hooliganism was obviously a big issue, state of the grounds and all of that stuff. It was just a bit of a flat period in football for a lot of us, Forest included, and Robbo, his career just sort of tailed off. You can't be that stellar forever, can you? People do figure you out eventually. Clough and Taylor had the split, and I know I can't remember the ins and outs of it now, but I'm very sure that the signing of Robbo was a very big part of the acrimony between them. Didn't Clough get a call from Barbara to say you won't believe what they've done? I think that was over signing Robbo, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think he'd been out for the day, or he'd been
walking the dog or something.
That was it. Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
Came home on a very nondescript day and then was told, you won't believe it, but Taylor's signed John Robertson. It was the famous event that sparked the end of Clough and Taylor's friendship, that Taylor had signed Robertson behind Clough's back. And it was a sad situation for everybody involved, really, because it not only saw the end of a great friendship between Clough and Taylor, but it meant that Robertson left Forest. He moved to Derby, which is controversial at the best of times, but it also marks a downhill decline for John Robertson as well, because he never hit the same heights that he had in a Forest shirt, and eventually he does come back to Forest in August 1985, and he's there for the 85-86 season, plays a couple of games, but never gets anywhere near the kind of highs that he enjoyed in his previous spell at the club.
No, I mean he never looked right in a Derby shirt. That was a horrible thing to see, really. As I remember it was that one with sort of like Bass across the middle and the diagonal stripe. He didn't look right. He wouldn't have looked right in it, whatever it was. And he ended up back with us. But I think by that point, again, old fella now, you get the dates confused. I suspect that was probably around the time somebody like Colin Walsh was coming through into the side. And Robbo was sort of a bit part player. I'm sure his experience was useful, but he didn't hit any heights, and it just sort of petered out from there on in, and left without much fuss or ended without much fuss or fanfare. There, and then he wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, although it's worth noting in this brief spell back at Forest, there's a couple of games where you've got him and Stuart Pearce down the left-hand side, which, if you'd have put both of them in their prime,
Oh,
one
man,
in front of the other. My word, that is that's a tasty prospect, isn't it?
There's the left-hand side of your dream team, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, like you say, he never really managed to hit those heights again that he'd done earlier in his Forest career. Things petered out for him, certainly at professional level. He left the club to join non-league Corby Town and subsequently had spells with Stamford and Grantham Town. I think for a while he worked in offices in Nottingham. I don't know if it was in law or as a solicitor or something, but he worked he had a couple of office roles before in the early 90s, picking up work as an assistant manager to his former Forest teammate, Martin O'Neill, starting at Wycombe Wanderers and then following him to Norwich, Leicester, Celtic and Aston Villa. And as a coach, he enjoyed a very successful period alongside Martin O'Neill, didn't he?
He did. Yeah, he talks about that. He talks about time at Celtic very, very fondly, doesn't he? As somebody who was famously, as a young man, a Rangers supporter, I believe. Yep. But I assume he wasn't too bothered, because what I do know about Drumchapel Amateurs is at the time they played in green and white hoops. They don't anymore. But so he can't have been that obsessive a Rangers fan. But I presume you have to be one or the other. And he was. But he does talk very fondly about that time at Celtic, and with a great affection for the time there. And I noticed on some Villa sites this week as well. You know, very very much loved and well liked for his time assisting there as well. I think either just where he went. People kind of liked him. You know, he'd have a story to tell, wouldn't he? And you don't like to over glamorize people's fondness for a drink, but I suspect you could probably sit him down and get him over a decent whiskey and hear some good tales out of him, I would have thought. And as a player, you'd have to respect him, wouldn't you? You know, if he was coaching you, you would have to, you would have to have a bit of time for him, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I was reading a story about his time at Celtic, and he was working with Stilley and Petrov in a training session and basically turning him inside out with the ball and dribbling it back and forth, and Petrov couldn't get anywhere near him, which just shows you, even with his, probably in his 50s by that point, he still had the magic in his feet. And any player who was wondering who's John Robertson, who is this guy? Well, there were no questions there. And I think he was well loved by players that he worked with and coached alongside Martin O'Neill. I think, like you say, quite an approachable, down-to-earth guy, and that seemed to go down well with players that he worked with during his coaching career.
Yeah, I think he also, he also turned out a few times for sort of like local, essentially pub teams, because I have got a couple of mates who had the chance to play against him. He'd have been in his 50s. They were perhaps in their 30s. Decent players, lads that I'd been at school with who had been decent players, and were sort of rubbing their hands with glee at the prospects of turning out on some pitch in Clifton on a Sunday morning after a skinful and getting a chance to kick in a loving way a legend, and reporting back afterwards, saying sort of like that, chatting with him, saying, "Did you get to kick him?" And it was sort of like, "I couldn't get anywhere near. Couldn't get anywhere near him. Nothing going on there. Very disappointing. They'd have done it with love, but they didn't get to do it. But I mean, he stayed around, didn't he? He was part of the local scene, which I think is quite a few Forest legends seem to do, don't they? Which is a great thing about our club, that you still see those people around, and a lot of big names living relatively normal lives. You can bump into European Cup winners in supermarkets, and our club and our city. Not everyone's got that, I don't think.
No, and I think that team in particular, the Miracle Men, they were very down to earth and continue to be long after their playing days were over. And yeah, Robbo was one of them as well. And I read earlier today that aside from a 5-year spell at Celtic between 2000 and 2005, from 1970 until the end of his life, he lived in the Nottingham area, which just shows you the how comfortable he was in this part of the world and what it meant to him for him to continue to live here long after his playing days at Forest were over. And yeah, like you say, you would go about your business. You might be in West Bridgford, you might be in Asda, wherever, and there would be Robbo doing his shopping, and you might go into the coffee house and there he is sat there just having a coffee and just like a normal person every day would. And that, I think that's, if anything, probably makes him even more legendary in the eyes of Forest fans, because in many ways he was one of them, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it's quite a thing, isn't it? An ordinary person who just happens to be the greatest footballer most of us will ever see or have seen or will see in the future, playing for the football club that we love. And, going to 2 World Cups and winning all the things he won. That is, I keep coming back to it, but that is quite a thing, isn't it? That's quite a life, and that's quite a legacy. I had a message on the day on Christmas Day, actually, from some of the lads that we drink with when we go up to play at Anfield, and they were recalling sort of like standing there and singing "There's only one fatty Robbo" at him in sort of 77, 78, 79, 80, and they were saying, we never sung songs about any other team's players, but he got under our skin. He led us a merry dance, for want of a better word, but we kind of got him. We could see the twinkle in his eye, and there was something about him that we liked. And then that reminded me of one of my favourite moments with him was that year we won the league. The final game of the season was a dead game, really, as much as a game against Liverpool's ever a dead game, but was away at Anfield, May 78. So he'd already scored the penalty in the League Cup final. We'd already wrapped the league up, and there was, the usual few of us tucked in that very intimidating away corner in the Kemlyn Road at Anfield, which was a scary experience. And Clough would always send the team out and send them down to the Cop goal. Just a bit antagonistic, but very very cool thing to do. And I can still picture them now sort of striding out in those very classic Forest blue blazers that you see them getting off the plane with the European Cup with, in grey slacks. And they walk down there, and Robbo's getting, there's only one fatty Robbo from the Cop. And he just pats his belly, picks up an imaginary ball from the side of the pitch, walks across very coolly to the penalty spot, puts it down on the spot, takes a couple of steps back, and reenacts the League Cup final penalty. Absolute bedlam. But a terrific moment. He was that kind of fella.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
Yep, a great character and well respected, not just in Nottingham, but in the wider football world as well, for his achievements, his skill, and everything that he brought to the game. And yeah, just talking a little bit more about his life after football, and he became a very popular figure in the after dinner circuit, and doing a lot of meet and greets in Nottingham, doing talk nights and these events, reminiscing about these wonderful days playing in that team under Brian Clough, winning the trophies that he did. And he was always good for a fun story, and it also seemed as if his own teammates hung on every word he had to say. He was somebody who brought so much to those kind of social situations. And you can imagine he was such a big part of that squad and that camaraderie that the great Clough team had.
Yeah, we've been blessed, haven't we? We've had more than our share like him. I've never seen Robbo do an after dinner speech. I would imagine it would have been very good. But we've had a lot of characters of that sort of ilk. Is that a byproduct of the Clough times? But a lot of those guys, even as far as and going as late as sort of like Mark Crosley, are all very good speakers with a real sense of down to earthness and humour. Stuart Pearce is the same, and Colin Barrett's the same. I bumped into Brian Laws up at Everton the other week, walking up to the stadium. These are guys who've achieved something in their lives, and have played at the top level for our club, but they seem like fundamentally decent human beings with 1 foot in reality. Is that just the times they were? I don't think it's just the times they're in, because I don't suspect every other team's players were like that. I think there's a Clough influence there and a cultural thing, and it's a thing that as Forest fans we ought to be really, really proud of. We are, we're not the biggest club in the world, are we? But we are special. And it's people like Robertson and those around him and those around that time that are a massive, massive part of that. And part of the reason why wherever you go in the world and where you say you're from, the first people will go like people say is, whether they go, Nottingham Forest, 2 stars, wherever you go. And you can't buy that. We'll never be able to afford to buy that, will we? But I wouldn't have thought, barring sort of like oil state sponsorship. But and even then. But they're a big part of what makes our fairy tale, really. And Robbo is the central, the central character, the Cinderella in that fairy tale, isn't he? Plus the he wouldn't want to hear that, would he? The fairy godmother. But plus the sort of like guy sprinkling the stardust. But players like Robbo. And some others around, your Martin O'Neills, your Viv Andersons, all of those people have been at the club, around the club a long time and weren't tearing up any trees, for pardon the pun. But they are that Cinderella story that makes our club famous all over the world. And when people say, "Oh, your club's not famous," it is. It doesn't matter where you go. We are famous for that story, and always will be while people are interested in football, because it will always be one of the great football stories, won't it? Where else is it going to happen?
I just want to touch on what your favourite John Robertson goal is, if you have one from his time as a Forest player. I've got a couple in mind, but I'll be interested to see what you pick out, Pete.
Yeah, I can't get past that diving header against Cologne. That is just imprinted on my brain ever since and until the day I die. A lot of them weren't that spectacular. I've got a vision of one beauty, possibly at home to Manchester City, as sort of one of those Trent End curlers. They're the ones I can always see in me. I can always see in my mind. I have just been reminded actually of the fact that the time only last year where John Robertson nearly got me killed, which was something I'd forgotten about until about 10 seconds ago. Which was that I was over in Buenos Aires watching a match at Platense, who's sort of Argentinian Primera Division team, a sort of middling sort of size club, and I was there, sat in their end at that, with a little Robbo pin badge on, with Robbo hoisting the European Cup, and I was getting some funny looks. I was getting some proper funny looks, and I went down for a trip to the loo at half time. I had about 5 or 6 very hard-looking Argentinian guys surrounding me, one pointing very animatedly at the badge, and they're going like, Maradona. And I'm thinking, well, why is this a problem? Half of you've got Maradona written on the back of your shirt, even though he never played for you, because it's just idle. What they thought it was Maradona in an Argentinos Juniors shirt, who are their hated rivals. And they were like, I was trying to explain. I was going like, no, John Robertson. They immediately got it. They were like, John Robertson, Nottingham. They knew straight away. And one of them then instantly got up on his phone, the Wikipedia page in Spanish for Forest with the same picture of Robbo hoisting European Cup. So he nearly got me killed, but then he saved me again. So perhaps that's a memory I ought to hold dear.
Amazing, though. It just shows you the worldwide impact, doesn't it, of Forest and John Robertson and all those achievements.
I did give this badge. I haven't got the badge anymore because I gave it to the scariest of the guys who became very interested in it once he knew. So somewhere in Argentina, there's a 6'7" bruiser with a shaven head, supports Platense, really doesn't like Argentinos Juniors, but walking around with a little badge with Robbo hoisting the European Cup on it. There's a thought.
Brilliant stuff. And yeah, I think when you look back on John Robertson's legacy, and not only the global impact he made, but also the impact he made in British football, he's a name which you talk to anybody who watched football in that era, they all know John Robertson. They all appreciate him and his achievements and just how much of a good footballer he was. And Nottingham Forest are going to recognise Robbo now by renaming the Bridgeford end to the John Robertson stand. That was announced after his passing by the Forest owner Evangelos Marinakis. And that is a fitting tribute, isn't it, to a man who achieved incredible things at Forest and helped take the club to its greatest days.
It's a good thing to do, isn't it? It's the right thing to do. Somebody said to me, who's not particularly interested in football, said to me yesterday, why do they wait till he's died? Football clubs always wait till people have died, don't they, to do that sort of thing. There's no malice or snub or anything in that. It's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Of those players, he is the right player to have done it for because of all the things that we've talked about. Terrible, very sad loss of Trevor Francis. Fabulous player, did amazing things for us, iconic moment, but hadn't got that. With all due respect, hadn't got that connection because he wasn't Mr. Nottingham Forest, was he? He was Trevor Francis, global England superstar, who happened to play for Nottingham Forest for a period of time, which was great. But all that history and backstory and the rags to riches bit, he hadn't got. So Robbo is exactly the right person for them to do that for. I like the idea of Robbo being there with, you can almost picture it, can't you? They should almost build some arms, sort of like mock arms, fiberglass arms, Clough's arms round him on one side of the pitch, Peter Taylor his arm round him from the other side of the pitch, and Robbo there in the middle. That's quite a nice picture. And maybe that's where they all are now.
Yeah, I'm sure so. And Brian Clough and Peter Taylor loved John Robertson, and we as Forest fans loved him too. He will forever be a special figure in the club's history, and even though he's sadly no longer with us, his memories and his achievements for Nottingham Forest will live on forever. That was our tribute to John Robertson. My thanks to Pete Hillier for joining me. We will be back with you soon on the 1865 podcast. Do subscribe if you haven't already to catch our latest content. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you soon.